Okay, thank you for joining us for the WAESN Roundtable featuring Akin Alston. And I'll let him introduce himself because I'm sure I won't do it justice. But this roundtable is based on the contents of Module 3, which is called Dispelling the Myths of Multiculturalism, Problematizing Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And the reason why I put together Module 3 is because ethnic studies is mistakenly pigeonholed into DEI departments in school districts. And so we want to challenge that practice and say that ethnic studies should be the foundation of all teaching and learning and should not be pigeonholed into initiatives or programs that are seen as, the Black and Brown people programs, because then you marginalize ethnic studies from the start. So I'm going to have us introduce ourselves, and we'll introduce Akin last since he's our speaker. And so I'm Tracy Castro-Gill. I'm the Executive Director of Washington Ethnic Studies now, and I'll just mostly be moderating this discussion. I use they, them, and she, her pronouns, and I identify as Chicana. Shraddha, you're next on my screen.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Shraddha Shrude. I am the Secretary Director at Washington Ethnic Studies now, and I am a high school math teacher. And I identify as East Indian Asian, and my pronouns are she, her.
Thank you. Alexis. We can't hear you. We'll come back to you, Alexis. Can't hear you. Okay.
And I identify as Black.
Oh, we just got the last part where you said you identify as Black.
Oh, sorry. My name is Alexis. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a 10th grader at Foster High School in Tukwila. I'm on the Washington Ethnic Studies Now Youth Advisory Board and a member of NAACP Youth Council.
Thank you. Amanda.
Hi, my name is Amanda Hubbard. I use she, her pronouns, mixed race Filipina, and I work in the elementary setting as an English language development teacher, K-5. And Tracy, it says that I don't have permission to turn on my camera.
I know, I just made you co-host, so you should
be cool.
Okay, and our guest featured speaker, Akin.
So I'm Akin Alston. My pronouns are he and him. I identify as African American no longer. I identify as Nigerian American, and I'm ethnically Yoruba.
Thank you. Thank you. And so just a reminder, we're talking about the topics of problematizing DEI, dispelling the myths of multiculturalism. It's module 3. And if you're not familiar, we've developed an 18-hour 9-module professional development series to support educators in implementing and creating ethnic studies curriculum. And so this is just digging deeper into that conversation. And Akin was nominated to be part of this conversation by Shraddha. And so Shraddha, if you could just quickly speak to why you wanted Akin to be part of this specific conversation.
Yeah, this specific conversation, I think it's really important because we have this tendency to think the solution to fixing Black and Brown students, which is in itself the bigger issue, is just putting people of color in front of them. We need to hire more educators of color. We need to have more we need to have more people of color on our slide decks. Oh, we should bring in families and have community guests, but it's more than just that. It's really about when you bring in educators of color, when you bring in community members, when you center our students of color and their lived experiences, that's when you get true ethnic studies. And it's really about changing who you are as a person and using ethnic studies as a way to decolonize yourself. And I cannot think of a better example of what that looks like, except for Akin, his existence, his work, his commitment to his students, and his commitment to true, authentic humanness. And that's why I wanted to nominate him, because he really, his existence dispels those myths.
Thank you. So Akin, we want to hear your story. I know most of us on this call, on the panel, have heard your story, but we could listen to it over and over and over again. And especially getting to the point you made about how you no longer identify as African American, because I think that that's so central to why we do ethnic studies.
Well, Charlotte, thank you for nominating me. Tracy, thank you for having me. I would say to you that I consider you all my little sisters. I'm almost 60. I tell people that I'm 60. I'm 58, but I just round up because I want to be used to saying I'm 60 when I get there. But I would just say to you that I am a product of Seattle Public Schools, but I became a math teacher, not because of Seattle Public Schools was helping me in all that way, but in spite of, or despite of what happened to me as a child, I became successful. And one of the reasons that I would say that's the case is because of this man here on the wall that I'm pointing to right there. That's my great-grandfather, excuse me, my grandfather, his parents, and his parents' parents on that wall. And I just remember the kind of man my grandfather was. And I remember when we moved to Seattle, I was born in San Francisco. We came to Seattle and we were put in the central neighborhood, the central district. And we were told, Seattle was a sundown town in those days. And he was told to have his family in that neighborhood and to stay there. And that was our boundaries. Those were our limits. And of course, when white people wanted it back, and they made it work so they could reacquire that property. But in any case, I would say that I don't call myself a teacher. That assumes that my students are a tabula rasa and they don't know anything until I pour something into them. So I'm just a teacher. I'm just I'm just a student. And I just happen to be, in most cases, the oldest student in the class. I attended Horace Mann the very first year of our country's federal Head Start programs. The very first year of the Head Start program, I was in that program as a 4-year-old child. And I remember learning to read as a 4th grader. And I remember becoming a very, very confident learner. I thought I could learn anything as a child because I could read. And I was very impressed by my reading skills. And I remember going to school able to say that I learned how to read at home and I wasn't taught to read as a child. By the time I reached the 3rd grade at Madrona Elementary School on 33rd and Union, something really, really ugly happened to me. Now remember, I'm 58. I'll be 60 in April. And I remember this event as though it were yesterday. We came into the classroom with our backpacks on, and we were, behind our little chairs, waiting for the teacher to allow us to take our seat. And she said to me, "What's 3 times 3?" And I knew it was 9, but I felt if I answered too quickly, she'd ask me a fact that I didn't know, because I just felt like her motive that day was to embarrass me. And so when I didn't quickly answer, she scoffed at me and she started laughing. And all the children in the classroom started laughing at me along with her. And I just stood there angry. I was livid. I can swear to you, that was the last day I ever gave a damn about Seattle Public Schools. As a 3rd grader, it was over for me in that one instant. I took the Hippocratic Oath. I didn't say hypocrite, I said the Hippocratic Oath when I became an educator. And it was this: and first, do no harm. You don't get hurt when you come to school, or you shouldn't. Then I go to Garfield High School, and I raised my hand one day in an algebra class. Oh, and by the way, I had to test to be allowed to even be in the algebra class because they didn't want people like me in the class. Hurdles, barriers. In that class, there weren't 5 African-American students. And I raised my hand and I asked this question. I remember it again like it was yesterday. I said, why is a negative times a negative a positive? That's the rule. That's the way it is. I said, but can you tell me why? I really don't understand, but why? And that white teacher looked at me and you know what he said? If that's your question, you don't belong in this class. I had a white professor at Howard University. I went to Howard University with no money for tuition. The only thing that I had was their acceptance letter. So I got on the bus, sold my car, and I was homeless in high school. I've been on my own off and on since I was 14, right? So I get to Howard University and they look at me there, and they're like, where's your mother? Where's your father? I said, hell, they're supposed to come. You accepted me, I'm here. But you don't have the money for tuition. I said, well, you accepted me. My exact words, you accepted me. Don't you have it? Let's go sit down over there. We'll find someone to talk to you. That night, I slept on the ground of the Capitol building. I've slept in front of the White House on the ground. I've slept on Pennsylvania Avenue on a bench in front of the FBI building. I've slept on the ground at the Securities and Exchange Commission building on Louisiana Avenue with the lights of that Capitol in my eyes. I've slept in crack houses. I've slept sofa surf wherever I could. I never missed one day of class in 5 years. So I had this white professor, it was an algebra trigonometry class. And he said to me one day, you're failing the class. Well, I knew I was failing because I was working from 3 a.m. to 8 o'clock in the morning, going straight to class without a shower. And I had to get up to go to work at 11 o'clock to get the buses and the subways and the trains to get out to Maryland. So I knew what the problem was. And so one day I go to his office. His name was Dr. Komm, K-O-M-M. I'm only 5'8". This guy came up to here on me, right? So I go to his office one day and I say, Dr. Komm, can you help me? So he was cantankerous, obstreperous, very rude. And he yelled and he screamed, and he spoke loud and wrote fast across the chalkboard. I said, can you slow down and help me to understand that? Why is there a radical sign there? Why is there an absolute value sign there? Why? Can you tell me why? Ah! He takes the chalk, throws it against the chalkboard and says, get out of my office. You don't know anything. Do you need this class to graduate? I said, yes, Dr. Komm, I do. He said, then get out of my office. You'll never graduate from Howard University. Right? So my story about why I teach math, the way I teach math, really just goes back to my own experiences as a child and as a young adult. I had a young man in those days, he was older than me. His name was Dr. Panda Kamara, Dr. Kamara, K-A-M-A-R-A. And he was from Sierra Leone. And I told him about the struggles that I was having in trigonometry with Dr. Komm. He said, well, drop the class. He's gonna fail you. I'll be teaching that class in the second semester. Take it from me, you'll be fine. And I remember Dr. Kamara having conversations with me. He could pick up a blade of grass. He would have a conversation. He always had a story to explain the math to you. And he looked at me one day when he was talking to me about math and he said, you look like my cousins. He said, you and I are related. Well, I knew I had African ancestry, of course, but he knew that he was from Sierra Leone. I know who I was. And I took the course from him, did well. Of course, I passed the class, graduated, and here I am. I went to Howard University to see him some years after that, and I walked into his office, and I found him exactly where I left him 30 some years earlier. And he was older, he was gray. He looked over the top of his glasses, he saw me, I waited, and he had a young African-American young man standing right next to him. And I looked at him, talking to that young man, and had an out-of-body experience. I had deja vu, and all of a sudden I got emotional just watching that. When the young man left, he called me by name. I came back to Howard maybe a few years after that, maybe 5 years after that, to see him one more time. And he was gone. So I went to the office and I said, where's Dr. Kamara? And the woman in the office said, he retired. I said, retired? I said, well, why did he do that? I'm naive, I don't get anything. She says, well, he was old. He was getting tired. And I said, but he was an outstanding mathematician, he helped me. I left that office with tears running down my face. I was crying. And then all of a sudden I realized the torch had been passed. Now it's your turn, Akin. What are you gonna do for Black people? What you saw him do for you and that other young man, now what are you gonna do? And I said, my God, I don't want to be at the front of the line. But yet and still, here I am. So I found it here in the Seattle area, different organizations. White people have stolen some of them from me. They've tried to misappropriate every good idea I ever had. And it's okay. And believe me, I'm not angry about it. Because here's the thing about me. Knock me down. I'll get up. Because my ancestors fought the KKK, white supremacy, Jim Crow, all kinds of oppression. They came over here with nothing and did great things with nothing. Our people know how to make a way out of thin air. So I'll be damned and doggone if I'm going to complain about some stuff that people want to put up against me. Go ahead, take your best shot. I'll be back. And the reason why is this. I love my people. I swear I do, more than my own life. When I see a Black child of color, they get to say that they own me. They get to say that they're my boss. They'll snap their fingers and I'll run. Nobody else can talk to me like that, but they can. I'll bow down to a little child. I love it when children tell me where to get on and get off. I love my students. And one of the things I'm ever reminded of is that in 1993, a little girl was shot in front of Akin, 9-year-old girl, Black girl, shot in the head. And I spent 2 weeks begging this city to find the money to bury that child. My mother was her daycare provider. My daughter was her busmate and schoolmate and classmate. Her name was Loetta Costin. The year I founded my Saturday Math Academy, I had a young African-American male, 12-year-old brother. He was badass. He could kneel on his knees and launch a football at least 50 yards. He was just done with talent, but intellect also. Minding his own business up in Skyway. His name was Elijah Juan Brown. Up on MLK Way, you should go east up into Skyway. Shot and killed. This is not a game. It's not a joke. I am so serious about my people and what they get from me and what they get from us. And that impels me, that compels me, that drives me. And I'll die in the service of my people. I swear it. Just prop me up against a whiteboard. I'll never retire from teaching. And I'm not faulting anybody that wants to, but I love this too much. I will die serving my people. I swear it.
That was like the most Akin story Akin could give. Oh my God, everything about it was just like, this is why I love this man. He's been my inspiration for so much of this math, the math curriculums and things that I've created. And it's so funny, our relationship, and this contributes to some of the basics of problematizing the DEI, because diversity equity initiatives, the first thing they do is they hire somebody from outside. And you don't hire people from outside when you truly want equity. You hire somebody who has the knowledge, who knows what's happened, who knows what's going on, who knows the people who have been underserved. This is when Akin talks about, I will serve my people. That's step number one is when you want equity, when you want justice, you start with the people. And then, oh, someone new wants to be a part of this. You don't just tell them what to do, you develop relationship, you get to know their story, you understand who they are and where they come from. And then you can move into now here's the things that we can do to make this relationship stronger so we can have more relationships that are stronger and so that our community is stronger so that we can learn and get to a point where we're thriving and not surviving. Like that mentality shift is what's made me the incredible teacher that I am. And that started with like meeting, I've met Tracy and Alex Ray at the previous year and a couple other people as well who like got me excited about it. But it was like when I met Akin and started working with him that I really saw the possibility for how to do that in a math classroom.
So Shraddha, I would just say to you that you're someone that I think of as my little sister. That's not to demean you, because I look up to you. And I love that when you tell me what to do, I just like young people. And you get to a point when you're my age, I think that you stop thinking about you anymore, and you just look at people who are younger, and you just wonder what they're going to get and what they're going to have. Tracy, you had asked me to speak about my indigeneity, my name change. Is that something that you want to hear now or a little bit later?
Yeah, I think I'd love to hear it now. And then if we could talk about specifically, I mean, we want to stick with the focus on why DEI is bad, and I'll
Yes.
get to some of the questions that I ask in module 3 later, but I'd love to hear your story first so that maybe we can come back to it when appropriate.
So since the age of 8, so that'd be for the last 50 years of my life, I've been trying to find out who I am. 50 years, I've researched my history. None of these pictures on this wall, none of these stories, none of this lore was known when I was a little boy. So I've crisscrossed the country trying to find out who I am. In any case, my family originates in a place called Warren County, North Carolina. We come from a human trafficking colony, place, plantation, they called it, called the Cherry Hill Plantation. My great-great-grandfather helped build that place. It's in North Carolina, Cherry Hill. In any case, that's where I got my name. So I met the white man, the great-great-grandson of them that gave me my name. I went to meet him at that house in 2002. So I've always just been a seeker. Well, when we got DNA and I had my test almost a year and a half ago, I discovered that I was Yoruba, Nigerian. So Africa, to say I'm an African American, that places me nowhere specifically. Africa is a continent, an ethnicity. It's just this huge, vast place made up of lots of folks. So where am I within that? Or with regard to diaspora, who am I? So the DNA test revealed that I'm Nigerian and that I'm Yoruba. So I went to Africa at the very beginning of the pandemic last March. It's been a month there. Before I went, I sojourned with a Nigerian family here. And we spent 2 days, about 10 hours, trying to find out what my name should be. So my name is Akin, A-K-I-N. And Akin was a description that I was giving them of my great-grandfather there. And they said, oh, such a man we would call Akin. And that's Yoruba. It means brave one or the courageous man. So I didn't want to change my last name because there's just so much of a connection with me professionally, and the name Alston now means something to me here. But I said, I have to change my first name because I've always wanted to know who I am. I've always said, when I find out, I shall embrace it.
Thank you. Yeah, I know a lot of people in racial justice circles don't like the whole DNA testing, but for those of us who've had our history stolen from us, you know, for whatever reason, because of the institution of slavery, because of us, you know, forced assimilation, it's such a, yeah, it's beautiful. Mm-hmm. And I'm grateful that you lived during a time when we have that technology where our ancestors didn't, right? Thank you. So I think the beauty in having a math teacher in this conversation is because if we can have this discussion with a math teacher, it removes excuses from every other content area, right? Like if we can talk about ethnic studies and math, we can talk about ethnic studies and anything. And so one of the questions when I problematize DEI, and I think most people who dabbled in ethnic studies know that ethnic studies is more than diversity, right? It's challenging systems of oppression. But I don't think most people understand why ethnic studies isn't equity or even racial equity. So one question I ask in module 3 is, does my racial equity practice mean equitable access to whiteness? So I'm going to type that in the chat because that's a big question. And if we can speak about that specifically in terms of math, that would be helpful.
I'm going to wait for you to finish typing the question so that I don't, oh, there it is. And Akin, if you want to go first, please.
I'm looking to see the question here. Oh, I see, okay. Yeah. Does my racial equity practice mean equitable access to whiteness?
So I'm thinking specifically about, because math is like the biggest subject we talk about when we talk about closing opportunity gaps, right? Because that's where students of color score the lowest in comparison to their white peers on standardized tests, right? So, and then we say anything that we put out there to support Black and other students of color in improving math scores, we call that racial equity. So when we think about it in that sense, does my racial equity practice mean equitable access to whiteness?
No, to me, it means equitable access to the joys and beauty of doing mathematics, which is so inherently and so uniquely from our cultures as people of color. So I create spaces, safe spaces, wonderful spaces. I'm shouting at you all here. I don't shout at students, right? We have so much fun. I laugh like I've been lobotomized. So in my spaces, I'm done with code switching. This is how it is. Take it any way you wanna. I'm a Black man. I'm not trying to escape that. I'm not trying to sound in a way to placate or appease you. So wherever I go, this is how I show up. And so in those spaces, most of my students are either Black or they are Latinx. And I have lots of groups of Spanish-speaking students and Spanish-speaking adults. And so there's no place for whiteness there. First of all, I don't understand it because I only understand BIPOC people. And so it's just so naturally, authentically who I am. But one of the things that I would tell you is that math is not taught in public schools. You heard me. I just told you, we don't teach math anywhere. We tell people stuff and we show them rules and nothing is derived. It's all thrown at them and told and shoved down their throats without joy, without meaning, and without understanding. So when I'm with my students, either the village idiot or the village elder. So I show up with the story, like Dr. Kamara. I was taught math by an African at Howard. And so to me, whiteness doesn't have a place in that presentation because it didn't work for me back then in Seattle schools. And I'm not going to carry it forward now. And I just have to let it flow from me, from how it comes to me through my ancestors, my experience. That's just how it is. And I'm doing some badass stuff with algebra right now. I'm going to share with you all a little bit.
I know in my classroom, like the thing, and just in my building and in my lived experience, trying to make math more equitable or make it move towards, one sec. Sorry. The thing that I think of is all the barriers that I came into, because math, you know, we call it a subject, but we've turned it into an object and we say it's objective. We say that, you know, this is how we do it. You go from algebra 1, you go to then geometry and then algebra 2. And only if you complete algebra 2 are you ready to be out in the real world and being a real mathematician. If you don't know algebra 2, then you're not going to know anything anymore and you're just going to not survive. If you ask the standard math, like a standard human being, you know, can you tell me, like, could you, I'm trying to think of, like, I haven't taught algebra 2. And so I'm trying to think of like a subject off the top of my head, but essentially algebra 2 is it's the study of about 10 different types of equations. So like linear equations, quadratic equations, logarithmic, etc. Most people could not do that. And that's including people like CEOs. So it isn't actually this huge, big barrier that everybody is talking about. You can actually study a lot of complex math before you reach algebra 2. And I have a really good example of that. In one of my students, I was just messing around and playing, joking with my kids at the beginning of the school year. And I posted on Instagram and I was like, if Seattle Public Schools were to give me a raise of a certain percent, let's say they gave me a raise of 1%, you know, for that week's salary, would I be able to make 6 figures? How long would that take me? Like, I need to figure out how to make 6 figures off of being a teacher. Let's figure that out. And I was messing around, made a joke, like as on a video on Instagram. And one of my kids popped in and was like, yo, Miss Trudy, I think I figured it out. I think you'd need to ask them for this percent. And he was just like fun because it was, number one, question based, and number two, relationship story focused. He had a reason for wanting to do that complex math. We talked about it. He sat there, he was like, give me 30 minutes. When I said, yes, I want to know what you think, he actually did all of this work and figured out what the solution was. And then he showed me his work and we sat down, we talked about it. And then I was like, there's actually a faster way to do this. Is something called summations. This is a student who's taken nothing more than geometry. And we learned about summation, and that there's taught him about two different types of summations. There's geometric summations, there's arithmetic summations. Which one was this? And we had a whole conversation about what sums are and what a Riemann sum is. And that stuff is stuff you get into in like AP statistics, and it's mentioned briefly in pre-calculus. These are higher level math classes that this student was able to achieve and understand and use and figure out an answer to that solution or to that problem. And he had only ever taken geometry and was convinced that he hated math and that he wasn't good at it. And it's just not true. And that's what, when I think about it, when we're talking about racial, the equitable access to whiteness, it is, how do we present problems? Right? Are we presenting our mathematics education as, you need to know this so you can be successful? Or are we presenting it as, here's an idea, what can we learn from this? Because just changing the way we approach mathematics is a racially equitable practice that does not center whiteness, because whiteness says there's a linear process and a way to do things, and this is what you need to be successful. What they're teaching you is, this is how you're successful in our society, this is how we keep you oppressed, this is what you need to do, and sort of, so we know what you know. And that's what it is, because mathematics has been created in such a way that when people graduate, everybody knows these are the things they should know. If they know anything beyond this, then like it doesn't matter, or they didn't really learn it, or whatever it is. That's why standardized testing is so big, and everyone thinks that the one subject you can actually test is mathematics. And it's because we have literally controlled what people get to know, when they get to know it, and how they get to express it. And that's not math.
So I like what you were saying, and as I listen to you, I have a word that I call it the learning proposition, not the student learning objective, the learning proposition. You're actually inviting me in, or with the question you're asking, you are giving your student a learning proposition. Hey, here's what you can do if you know this. If you can do this, you can do that. And you're giving a basis for which to even, give a damn in the first place. And school, for me, has never answered that.
I think that's a good, oh, go ahead, Amanda, but then I think that that's a good segue into you showing us what you're doing with algebra.
I think there's also a really big difference between what we say and what we do, because the Common Core standards would have you believe that teachers are creating meaningful connections between what they're teaching in math and real life. And we all know that that's absolutely not true. And when we look at the language of diversity and equity and inclusion, what you find is that they have made the goal the lowest possible fucking bar, right? Like, we got Akin into schools in Seattle public schools. We had him in these spaces in which theoretically he could learn. Check, included. Like, that's literally all that means. So like, as far as they're concerned, they did the job, and it was just our students' attitude or something like that that meant that they didn't learn what they were supposed to learn. It's very much the I taught it, they should have learned it mentality, but where's the love in that? Where are people in that? We don't give up on children that we love, who are really truly part of our lives, when they don't get it that first time. We don't say, well, I already said it to you, so I really don't know what else I would do for you. We don't treat people we truly care about that way. And yet we have normalized that attitude to the extent that we have math interventionists, we have reading interventionists. And now it's like, well, I tried to teach it, but it didn't happen. So why don't you go ahead and see this other person? And it fully ignores the fact that we didn't give students real context to the numbers that they're playing with, especially at the elementary level. Do you know how depressing it was to be a math interventionist, where the teachers are like, they don't know place value, and so all they want me to do is drill place value into an 8-year-old, but who the fuck cares about place value as an 8-year-old? That's the most boring, like, inaccessible, abstract entry point into mathematics you could possibly generate for early learning. Why do we do that? I could get students to engage in complex mathematical concepts that theoretically work for their grade by giving it context. We could solve and plan for a field trip that we were actually going to go on and create real math problems out of it. Like, yo, kids, guess what? Some of the PTA decided that they wanted to donate lunch for our field trip, but it's going to be Subway sandwiches. We know y'all can eat, but we also know that it's not going to be what we're doing to give each of you a foot-long sandwich, because some of you, that like 2-foot-long sandwiches is the size of you. So we're not going to do that. But we also know that's the size the sandwiches come in. And the kids are like, they're right. That's the size the sandwiches come in. So how do we split up sandwiches? And that's how I taught fractions, because they know that the size on the food really matters, but the size in an abstract fraction number does not matter. 1/4, who cares? Let's put the 4 on top. Oops, was that wrong? I didn't know, because it was meaningless. But I can tell you that if you tried to pull that with a like, oh, I wasn't actually supposed to give you that much sandwich, there'd be a fight, because context matters. And so instead of like beating your head against the wall because like the kids are not getting place value, instead, why don't you help them understand why we would even look at place value? Like, where does that really truly in life come into play? And then you're not fighting kids to care about numbers that you frankly also don't care about. You're trying to check a box. You're trying to like catch your kids up. You're trying to get them to pass a test. Like, none of those things are also even speaking to your own soul, which is why you feel hella mean and maybe depressed and definitely a little bit sad, I should hope, about not being able to get that understanding to help your student get that understanding. And so this is also about like reconnecting with what real learning is. And real learning is not school. And that's the other piece of like the narrative that's happening right now in remote learning, is that somehow, because students aren't in school buildings, learning has stopped. But kids aren't in school the whole year. Are we saying that for the other 180 plus days, the kids are just slowly like sand through your fingers, losing all knowledge? Like, that doesn't make sense either. So it's a really problematic narrative. And what is the measure? Like, what is it that's making them say that learning is lost, or making them say that the kid needs place value? It's a misguided marriage between defined success and standardized testing. And that is, I think, the number one thing that killed joy in elementary schools. I think it's the number one thing killing joy in school learning, period. And I can feel the difference in students who are like anxious about upcoming standardized testing. Like, this time of year, like the fights start to spike, right? Like, you hit March, April, and it doesn't matter if you're in a school building that tries to minimize the impact of testing, because the kids know that at least 1 to 2 days on any given week for a like month and a half period, they're going to be parked in front of a computer to take a test for literal hours. And that's even in school buildings where they're like, we're only going to give it the one time. We're not going to make them go back and check anything. We're not even going to pretend it's important, but everyone is stressed about it. And we're the climate of the classroom. And so then learning becomes this objective of passing this test that no one actually cares about, no one looks at or reads. No teacher has ever in the existence of teaching ever meaningfully used the results of those garbage tests to decide anything about teaching. And so millions of dollars, hours of time, and countless generations of students who are like done because we pushed something that was about box checking because the bar is so low, because it would take time and effort in a different non-busy work kind of way to establish relationships, not just with your students, but also with your colleagues. Because y'all, we are not meant to be creating everything by ourselves. We are not meant to be teaching alone. People are social creatures, and we are also stuck in a loop because they've managed to also silo all of us. And so reach out and find someone who's done like you are and rethink it and redo it and start telling more stories in classrooms.
Yeah, I remember asking my principal for data to show the spike that I knew existed prior to testing, and he refused to do it. Like, I just wanted to know how many referrals were sent for discipline, like leading up to testing, and he would not provide that because he knew, because he's very pro-testing. He knew that that would, you know, put a hole in his argument of protesting.
One thing I just wanted to add about, because I heard Amanda say earlier, I wanted to emphasize, because she did a good job of phrasing this and talking, this is not created for students of color. This is not created for Black kids. I've been getting like some, you know, questions from, yes, from trolls, but also from legitimate educators who are like, why would you think that Black students can't understand things abstractly? And I was like, where did I say that? I never once said that they can't understand things abstractly. I said you have created a culture where you do not allow them to breathe or to think or to question. And we saw that and heard that in Akin's story of his own lived experience. We don't allow students to question the same way, like what Tracy just said, we don't allow educators of color to question. So what we're doing when we're talking about, you know, things like ethnic studies in math and why math is, quote, racist, is we're saying that we have not allowed the very people who we claim to serve with these tests, with these, you know, intervention specialists, people to actually breathe. And that is that exact example of making your racial equity practices and equitable access to whiteness. You are saying they are not capable and therefore need extra help to be more white. What we are saying is change your teaching practice, use the data, use the relationships, use whatever it is, but the thing that needs to change is not your students, it's you.
Not even really your curriculum, because the curriculum stays the same. It's how you teach it that changes, right? It's how you approach it that changes. And so I want to say one thing about inclusion, and then I want to get to what Akin's talking about in algebra. But what I see as inclusion, well, I was a middle school teacher, so that gives some context. What I see as inclusion in math is using the kids' names in the word problems.
Yes, that's the extent of it, right?
Well, don't forget, you're gonna throw some some Ave in there too.
So
Akin finna gonna go too. I saw that and I was like, oh Jesus Christ.
So the opposite of that question of is my equity practice, you know, providing equitable access to whiteness. The opposite, the flip side of that coin is my teaching practice providing opportunities for my students to self-actualize in their full selves and identities, right? That would be the opposite of it. We don't want equitable access to whiteness. We want students to be able to self-actualize as their full selves in all their identities. And then Akin left.
This is how we do. I love it. This is how we do here.
All right, Akin, what are you doing in algebra?
So I have a book here. Some of you probably have heard of it. It's called Radical Equations. Can you see it there? And this book was written by a Black man who was nearly beaten to death in Mississippi in the 1960s. And basically he asserts that access to mathematics is akin to having access to your civil rights. And he marched with Dr. King. So I read this book. I first saw it maybe 25 years ago, but that was at a really formative time of my career. So I really got excited about it. There's another book here I could share with you. This is like a weapon, right? And it's called the Liber Abaci. And this is the seminal work of the Middle Ages, written in the 12th century by one Leonardo da Pisa, better known as Fibonacci. And he learned about mathematics. And he's telling you the story right here. It's translating Latin to English. He's telling you the story of how he, as this white guy, sailed south across the Mediterranean with his dad and learned about something called algebra, because they were using something called the Roman numeral system, which was really weird, and it could have never advanced mathematics, and it had no positional or place value. So in any case, our students don't know that our number system is called the Hindu-Arabic number system. They don't know that. They don't know that algebra is an Arabic word. Because see, Muslims are bad. They're bad. I don't know why they're bad, but right? Look, we got it from them. And Schroeder has talked about the Pascal's triangle, or the Chinese triangle, or Pythagorean theorem, or the a squared plus b squared right angle theorem. That's what it is. Because Western culture loves to misappropriate ideas and represent them as new or their own. I swear to you, we don't know how the pyramids were built yet. So the mathematics that we think somebody in Europe just recently taught us is new. Guys, believe me, people were smart a long time ago, right? And so taking that information and then repackaging it, reframing it, put your name on it, isn't really cool. So I've told my students that algebra is something that they have very innate intelligence about. That's where we start. So I know a lot of people question the innate intelligence of my people. I get that, right? But I don't. So we're doing something right now, and I'm actually piloting the course for North Seattle College about what I'm telling you right now, and I'm calling it Algebra Invented. So here's the supposition, here's the premise. You've never heard of algebra. No one's had a chance to tell you anything about it. So you have to invent mathematical truth. Now you're doing mathematics. Okay, here we go. I told my students that there's a symbol that makes no sense. This symbol makes no sense. It doesn't. Now I know what it represents, but I didn't think of it. And how the hell are you going to tell me how to use it? Because it didn't come from me. So I told my students, instead of saying that symbol, we're going to make our own symbol for equality. And it's going to be like this. It's going to go like this, or it'll be like this, or it'll be like that. Now, without giving you any interpretation, when my students first saw these symbols, you know what they told me? Oh, that one means, the top one means equals. This one means the side is heavier than this side. This one means it's heavier on that side. These, not balanced, not balanced, balanced. I never told them anything. I just said, what does it mean? So they decided that they don't understand where this comes from. So now we're building, their task is to build a complete number system. They have to create their own symbols and their own notation. No one can posit or give anyone any formal mathematical truth they heard in the classroom unless they rename it, reframe it, and explain it in their own words, and then the whole group has to accede and accept it. And I'm not the arbiter of truth. These classes there are adults that watch these classes and they can't believe what they're seeing. Students are deriving properties of equality. They're creating all kinds of mathematical truth. Here's a question that we offer to them. And I did this with some adults, and they just drives them crazy. They hate it. But I tell them, guys, look, this is a true statement. See, I'm from Mars, and I don't understand your number system. 5 apples in a tree. I take away 2. How many do I have? 2. I don't have 3. So I believe now that 5 minus 2 equals 2. And so I told my students, unless someone can prove why it's not, then we can't accept it as proof. And so some teachers will say, well, it's 3, we know it's 3. No, we don't know it's 3. Let's think about why that's the case. So my students said, here's what they would like. They'd like to write it like this. They would say, I'm going to show you how they would write. They would say, they'd write it like this. And now they've given us a proof. And we don't have to talk about properties of equality until they're ready to derive them. Let me say this to you, right? Our students, when we give them intelligent questions, and activities, and engagements, they will produce some really badass mathematics. So we have a question before our students in my academies, and it's simply this. If I want to write 1, I write 1 dot. If I want to write, I'm going to step it down to 7. I want to write 7, I write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 dots, see? And so if I want to write a billion, I have to write a billion dots. You know what the children will begin to do? Create symbolism, notation, abbreviation, and rules. And they will revise it. Let me just show you one more thing. I'm going to stop for a second. I'll take a breath, right? So we said that we were going to show them visuals that had no meaning very much, that they would have to derive. So we said, if one circle equals 1, now I'm going to put a square around it. See that one circle, 1 dot, now I'm putting a square around it over here, right? And I'm going to put another circle, another black dot, and put a square around it. And I'm going to say that equals 14. You know what they're trying to do now? They're trying to find out, okay, if 1 dot is just 1, but now you put a square around it or a box around it, and when I add them up, they're 14. So now we have to reinvent the whole number system, and we're working on ways to explain math that are not formal, not standard. And so I'm calling it Algebra Invented. We're reinventing the whole thing. And can I share my screen for a second? I want you to see something here, right? And to me, our students need to learn not by being told and talked at, they need visuals, okay? So I have a visual that I'm gonna share with you. And so you see these girls? Okay, now I swoon when I see them, okay? And so this basically was shown the week Kamala Harris became VP. And I said to my students, oh, that's 7G. Oh, you mean 7 girls? I said, well, 7G or G times 7, yeah, it is. Oh, I see the ratio of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I see a ratio of 6 to 1. 6 stockings, 1 with no stocking. And we're having all these conversations. Then we say, okay, well, it's hard to know what's true about 7 girls, but what if we just showed you, see this one girl right there? See that? See her? See the one girl taking the oath of office? See 1G. That's 1G. So we're having all these conversations and nobody is using formal rules. Let me show you this one thing. Now let's stop for a second. So we show them, okay, so we're looking at stuff like this. And our students who've never done, these are 3rd graders, by the way, they're 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. And they're solving for these values in each of these cases without being told. I'm gonna say this, I'm gonna stop talking. This one little girl, right? She looked at this one and said, okay, you got something called M and N, and you added M to the N, but nothing changed. And she's like, well, I don't know. Is that 0? I said, why are you whispering to me? Shout it out, child. Is it 0? I said, oh, it is. I said, yeah, that's what it is. Identity, property of addition. I mean, look, I'm telling you, when you lift our students up and ask them questions, guys, I'm telling you, I have so much documentation of lessons that I'm doing and the mathematics that these kids are doing. They're even deriving SI units for science that aren't given to them because they just know how to balance equations. I talk too much. I'm gonna stop. Look, I tell nothing.
Here's the problem with what you're saying, though, Akin. This is all great and good, but we have an issue that educators are not actually currently qualified to do what you're asking us to do, because we are not taught to educate and teach our children. We are taught to tell them what to do. In my math methods class, every other math methods class that I've heard people talk about, they don't teach us how to question. They don't teach us how to connect linear line, like how to connect the thread from place value all the way up through geometry and into calculus. They don't teach us the through lines because through lines allow us to think. And they don't want a teaching force of thinking educators to create a people who are thinking people. What they want is people who are complicit in whiteness and who will continue to perpetuate capitalism and that grind culture and continue to test thinking that's all their value is because it keeps people down and keeps other systems in place. So your idea is exactly what we need, but it's not what people want.
I have to stop because I want to bring this back. I know, because I do what I do, that this is an example of ethnic studies. Yep. That people who are watching this may not understand that connection. Like, how is this ethnic studies? So it's not diversity. It's not just adding Akin to a classroom like Amanda was talking, check. It's not equity, because we know we have seen racial equity initiatives mean equitable access to whiteness if all we're focusing on is closing opportunity gaps, which means increasing test scores. And it's not inclusion, which means, putting kids' names in the problems. So I think Akin just demonstrated to us what ethnic studies is. So can we bring that point home? How is what Akin's talking about ethnic studies?
I mean, number one, you don't tell them what to think. You teach them how to think. And that is key in ethnic studies. Critical thinking. Every theme we talk about, you can't understand unless you are thinking critically about yourself, your identity, systems, history, the subject matter, the impacts. You think about all of that. And by simply saying M plus N equals N and providing no context and saying, what are you thinking about? You are forcing children to think. All these great mathematicians in history, think about these great scientists, think about like Newton, who was, in my eyes, a mathematician. And all he did was ask questions. Why the hell did this apple hit me in the head? Why did this happen? Why did that happen? All these people that white math touts, they never understood why they were successful. And it was because they were allowed to do what you're doing with your students. And that's a huge part of ethnic studies, is actually taking true, authentic learning and letting it happen.
So I think also too, Western culture is about command and control. And it's very hierarchical, very stratified. And I'm up here and I tell you, you do what I tell you. And I just think that I devalue my students when I don't really respect their innate intelligence. And so I ask them questions all the time. And the question that we're going to ask them this Saturday is, who was president of the United States a million seconds ago? Who was president a billion seconds ago? Who was president a trillion seconds ago? Well, Akin, maybe they don't know. It's not about what they know. It's about how they behave when they don't know. So we'll think about it. Because a trillion seconds ago, this country didn't exist as a nation, right? And so how can they understand that? So now we're talking about SI units. the unit for time, but we have to talk about it. And so I told them that you can feel time. I said, tell your mama you're gonna snap your finger every second. She's gonna time you. Then tell your mom you're gonna snap your finger every 10 seconds. Then every 60 seconds. Now you have to estimate that, you have to gauge, you have to feel for that. You're dancing, right? How long y'all dancing? Always music. I can't stand a quiet classroom. If there's not people making noise, knocking something down, I lose my mind. I say, guys, come on, we wake this so-and-so up, right? And so I think for a while, Tracy, it used to be the case that my Blackness, I only opened that up when I was around Black people or people of color. See, I only have really felt comfortable around people of color, the truth be told, all my life. And uppity people and them people, I'm like, oh, wow, I got to change coats with hell, but I'm done with it, right? So, but now I've discovered that everybody needs this melanin. Everybody can benefit from this approach. Everybody can.
Yeah. Alexis, we haven't heard from you. Do you have anything?
Yes, I have a lot of, well, I don't know, I just have been learning a lot, and I don't know where this recording is going, but I feel like I should send this to my math teacher, because this is just like very eye-opening, which is not a new thing in WAESN. I feel like I learn something new every single time I have a meeting here. But it's also, for me, like, it's really, oh, one thing that was said at the very big, or like way towards the beginning was, I'll die in service for my people, or I'll die in service of my people. And I think that that's so powerful for me as just a 16-year-old. And like, I'm always, not always, but I'm figuring out like what is going to be my service that I'm going to die in for my people. And like, that was just really powerful for me. And the algebra, invented algebra, like that's just, I don't, it's all amazing, a lot. Oh, great.
Yeah, the recording will go on the WAESN YouTube channel. And I just want to say what speaks to the ethnic studies part of this. Yes, the valuing the inherent intelligence and knowledge that our students come to us with, but putting everything in story and context, like that's ethnic studies, right? What are you going to do with what you learn? It's not about filling in bubbles on a paper, right? What's the precious knowledge? What's the Quetzalcoatl? What's the Huitzilopochtli we talk about with the Nahuatl, right? Where are we going to put that? How are we going to help our people? How are we going to be in service of our people with our knowledge?
Ethnic studies is inherently anti-capitalist.
I would also add that ethnic studies is about real learning, and school is about meeting goals. And so if we want schools to become real places of learning, that also means they have to be real places of critical thinking. And that means that our targets can't be linear. It means that we can't continue to treat education as something that happens in isolation. And so ethnic studies is about getting back to what we wanted to do. I would hope what we wanted to do when we decided to become teachers.
No, Tracy, I was thinking that there needs to be a mathematics summer institute led by BIPOC and students. So Alexis, I hate this word, adults, but anyway, so, but BIPOC people, especially with our students, we come together and create this wonderful learning experience where people can come and can say, guys, this is how you do it. Y'all do it this way, we do it this way. You talk about it this way. Have you ever thought about it this way? And what if we just model this level of authenticity? I'm gonna put a woman's name in the chat. And when I wanna talk about compound interest and how money grows over time, I don't talk about anybody other than this woman right here. And you can actually watch some videos about her. And then the conversation, the story naturally arises from this, right? But I feel like since we know how to do it, then we should actually be how would I say this? Just creating an institute. Google Osceola McCarty. I call her the woman that knows that money makes money and money that money makes more money. And so I tell people that she is the future value times the present value times the future value over time, and an interest rate, raises some power, because this woman washed white people's clothes for nickels and dimes in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and 70s, and 80s, and amassed a fortune. See, it's the story, like Tracy said. And now the math derives or flows from that. It just does. I was having a conversation with our students, and I said, would you want to be a millionaire? Yeah, I want to be a millionaire. Is it good for everybody to be a millionaire? Yeah. I said, really? What happens if everybody in the Rainier Beach area, let's just say that's just our enclave, has $1 million? What happens when they all go to Safeway? Shelves are bare. Now we have shortages. Next day, when those shelves are restocked, or whatever they are, the price of those goods will go up. Why? Now we're talking about inflation. So then I say to them, how can we know the number of poor people, oppressed and downtrodden, our country really wants? Because our country doesn't want everyone to be employed. Our country doesn't want everyone to have a living wage. Our country doesn't want equality and fair access for everyone. Everyone is white, I get it. But the rest of us, it ain't for all of you. And they taught us a lesson on January 6th at that Capitol riot. We can do whatever we want to. So ask your students, take a real problem like this. There's an optimum number of people in poverty and suffering that our country wants to have. I bet you that's true.
All right, we are over time. I hate that these are only an hour because I could probably talk for all day. A Math Ethnic Studies Institute. We are planning a summer institute, so maybe we'll just make some portion of it all about math, or at least people can choose that if they want. So yeah. All right. There's no questions in the chat. So like I said, this will be uploaded onto the WAESN YouTube channel. Check out our new WAESN website. It's brand spanking new. And if you're interested in learning more about these topics, sign up for the PD. We don't go specifically into math, but we do challenge these concepts of DEI and try to understand what ethnic studies is. And even in module 3, we hear from Dr. Curtis Acosta and Dr. Jeff Duncan Andrade, and they say all the things that we said today, like math is about community, math is about making everything human and sharing medicine and, culture. So yeah, and it should be a beautiful thing. And Akin is helping lots and lots of children learn how beautiful math is. Yep. All right. Thank you,
Thanks so
everybody.
much,
Thank you,
Akin.
Akin.
Take care,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye.